Hello, I am Jamie Lewis Keith, a partner at Education Council, which serves as legal and policy advisor and senior administration for the Society's Consortium on Sexual Harassment in STEM, with two M's to include medical fields. The consortium is a leadership collective of well over 100 societies committed to advancing ethical, professional, and inclusive STEM fields, and we are in our fourth year. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. David Skorton, the President and CEO of the Association of American Medical Colleges and the former President of Cornell University and University of Iowa and Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, to reflect on the theme of courageous leadership toward gender and racial equity and diversity for excellence and integrity in STEM fields. So David, let's start with the first question. What does courageous and ethical action mean to you as a society leader when the aim is gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion? And if you can give an example of when you personally took courageous action in engaging your board, your leadership team or members to advance these interests, or when you supported your team in doing so, I think that would be really meaningful for our members.
Well, Jamie, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to congratulate the consortium on what you're doing. It's just terrifically important. And it's an honor and privilege to be here with you today. But I have to take exception to the question, because the real courage and the leadership is happening, every day on the front lines of the struggle for diversity, equity, inclusion, and gender equity. And with all due respect to my colleagues who head up societies or associations or other organizations, we're really there to serve the needs of those who are dealing with the effects of the problems that we're trying to solve. Number one, I've tried very hard over the years and different leadership opportunities I've had to listen to the people who are actually struggling and living through these areas of problems. And then secondly, I think it's important if one has a leadership position and reports to a board, to not worry too much about that difference we sometimes focus on between so-called governance and so-called management. We all have to link arms and recognize that we have problems and decide we're going to do something about it and make sure we understand the extent and the depth of the problem and then move ahead. We have a fabulous board that was willing to tackle this, to speak out and say what needed to be said, really in two areas. One area was to recognize that we had problems and what the problems were and what the extent of the problems and the ramifications and implications of the problems were. That's number one. And without that, without a dispassionate assessment of where we are, no progress can really be made. And then secondly, to begin to chart a course toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, starting really with looking in the mirror and trying to understand each of our inherent biases and each of the hills that we have to climb as individuals. So those were the ways in which we tried to tackle. I hate to use the word I because it was a team effort and still is and really always will be. But it really has to do with understanding by listening to people undergoing the actual experience and then deciding to work together at the board level and the management level to define the situation as it is and then see how we can move forward.
Were there any ways and sort of approaches to communicate with your board that were particularly effective, especially in raising up the voices of those who are struggling and need to be heard so that there could be real understanding as you link arms with your board? Well,
we developed, and when I say we, I mean the board and the leadership of the AAMC. We developed a new strategic plan beginning a few months after I came to the organization. And we decided to do it together, to do the conception and the writing and the argument and eventually the approval together as one combined body, the board and what we call the leadership team. And what we decided to do in that case was first to look at the mission and vision of the organization. We switched two words, doesn't sound like much. But our earlier mission statement was that we would serve and lead academic medicine. We switched serve and lead, so now it says we lead and serve, understanding that someone has to take the first step toward facing these issues, recognizing that we have failed to deal with them adequately, and then moving ahead together. So that was the first thing. I asked that our board, when they do my annual evaluation, in part, base it on the diversity, the composition of the organization, and the climate, the environment, whether it is an environment that is conducive to people feeling safe, to people feeling the possibility of success. And I passed that accountability down to the 15 people who report to me, who run the different major divisions. We call them clusters in the AAMC, the chiefs. Climate is so important. I really can't stress it enough, that if the climate is not conducive to a person feeling safe and the possibility, indeed the probability of success, not only are they not going to succeed, they're just not going to stay. And so we tried that accountability. It's still an experiment unrolling, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. But that's what we're trying to do.
You spoke about climate. Is there a climate or culture change that is related to gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion? It's an initiative that you and your team championed and are particularly proud of. And are there ways in which that has actually energized you and motivated you in the ongoing work?
Yeah, I'm very energized and very proud of the things I'm going to mention to you now, but I want to start by making sure that whoever has a chance to see and listen to this understands that I personally am not taking credit for anything but listening to people who really understand and have a life devotion to this work. And we have some just terrific people in our organization who really have made this a career commitment. And so we started off with a first statement. This was in 2020, a statement on gender equity, for example, in academic medicine, and a commentary piece in our journal, Academic Medicine. And this statement launched a new gender equity portfolio. We assigned the position of a new director for gender equity initiatives. We developed, that is, that person and her team developed a comprehensive website with resources related specifically to gender equity. We did 2 new salary equity reports and revamped the State of Women in Academic Medicine report. We tried to garner and did garner institutional pledges to address gender equity. And we prioritized 3 key issues starting in 2020, when we kicked this off, with webinar series and publications and scholarship. And the 3 issues were women of color and intersectionality. The second was salary equity, and the third was sexual harassment. And a formal 5-year strategic plan just for gender equity will launch this coming January, in January of 23. And I do want to credit my colleague Diana Lautenberger for extraordinary leadership right from the beginning and continuing in that. Secondly, I want to cite my colleague, who I know has worked very closely with you as well, Dr. David Acosta, who did me the honor of allowing me to be a co-author on a piece we had in the American Journal of Medicine entitled "Making Good Trouble, Time for Organized Medicine to Call for Racial Justice in Medical Education and Healthcare." And the making good trouble, of course, something that late John Lewis said. And very motivated by hearing stories and conversations with those in our member institutions, those people on the real front lines who are implementing the ideas outlined in that piece. And we got many of the ideas, of course, from listening to our members. And then finally, I'm very motivated by the people within the AAMC, just in the association staff itself, creating employee resource groups. And Dr. Acosta and Yvonne Massenberg, our Chief Human Resources Officer, formed a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. We hired a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director, and every single division, every single cluster contributes volunteer expertise to that Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. So that's how we've kicked it off and sort of pushed the ship out to sea. And we hope that it sails bravely and very far. And I think we're doing pretty well so far, promising a very long distance to go, a very long way to go. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the sort of framework that we developed broadly. We called it the Framework for Addressing and Eliminating Racism within the AAMC across academic medicine and beyond. There's really four parts of this. The first is looking in the mirror, understanding ourselves, and we did training. Everyone in the leadership team and I did extensive training in that area, always much more to do. Secondly, we looked at the AAMC itself. We continue to look at that and looking at the how we're doing in terms of gender equity, racial equity, salaries, promotions. And yes, we have a distance to travel, but we're looking at those kinds of, if you will, human resources kinds of data, hard data on how we're doing. We also had some general climate questions on a survey, as many organizations do. And then we also have a newly released sexual harassment monograph, which is the first of its kind, to my knowledge, analysis of the prevalence and experiences of sexual harassment among U.S. medical school faculty in the workplace. Finally, I want to tell you that we introduced two new tools that came out of Dr. Acosta's group for assessing the culture and climate of an institution beyond, not instead of, but beyond surveys and discussions. These include one which is called DICE, D-I-C-E, standing for Diversity, Inclusion, Culture, and Equity. It's an inventory. And the other one called FPI, for Foundational Principles of Inclusive Excellence Toolkit. And in the first few months that I was at the AAMC, the Office of the President, my group, took that FPI training by Dr. Acosta himself. So those are some of the ways in which we're attempting to actually make some measurements, some qualitative and some quantitative, some serious commitment to assess climate. Whether you like these tools or other tools is very, very, very important. And you know, it's not enough just to identify, obviously, the areas that need improvement. While we don't have all the answers, that's for sure. What we can do is each of us can collect and share best practices from others. In my case, those who are, you know, the heads of associations, or in other cases, those are the heads of companies, or schools of medicine, or hospitals, or health systems. And so using these tools, using surveys, listening to those on the staff, again at the front lines, and then doing it repeatedly, longitudinally, to see if the things that are implemented are making any difference or not.
An institution or a society can have great policies, but how do you actually foster broader ownership and implementation of those policies and more norms of ethical conduct toward gender and racial equity and diversity? How do you actually make that part of the way you do business every day?
One is to state the values of the organization and to do it repeatedly. A second is to live by those values, which means being for real tough about corrections made if the values are not followed. In my view and in my experience, Jamie, nothing is more damaging to an effort like this than a perception of the people who could be positively affected by it, a perception that it's all rhetoric, it's show business, and that we just want to have some nice looking words on a PowerPoint, and that's basically it. And so it's a matter of holding each other accountable. And it's hard sometimes to hold people accountable because it requires, I'll use the word confrontation, or sharing with the person as a bystander or upstander is sometimes used. It may require some forms of restorative justice if things have gone awry. It may require other approaches, but whatever the approaches, which really have to be formalized and customized for a given institution at a given time, in a given place, or a given part of the institution, there has to be a willingness to live by those values. So that's one thing, the values. Secondly, the processes and procedures have to be reliable and quick and dependable. And we haven't reached the promised land yet at the AAMC. Maybe we never will exactly get there, but I think it's important that we try. And I want to be very open with you because it's very important to be open when we're talking about such an important topic. I've gotten feedback from colleagues within the AAMC saying, they have doubts about whether this or that procedure is as good as it could be, or whether we take things as seriously as we could be, as we could. Have I heard that elsewhere? You bet. Have I heard it at every organization that I've had the privilege of leading? You bet. But that's the nature of the beast. This is a very, very difficult thing. And it requires a change in human perception. It requires a change of our self-perception. It requires a change in behavior. And those are very tall hills to climb for mere mortals like us. So that's what we're trying to do.
And have there been any sort of strategies or key levers that you think have been particularly useful in advancing that aim?
One thing is for me to be able to stand up in front of people to whom I serve, whether it's my own staff or others, and say, you know, I struck out on that one, or I apologize because we didn't get that done. Sometimes that has to be done one-on-one in a very private conversation. Sometimes that has to be done in a more public phase. But I think that it's important for us to be, for lack of a more elegant word, Jamie, we have to be real with each other. And we have to be able to say with no false humility that we have a lot to be humble about and that we have a lot of work to be done. And the fact that in 2022, we still have so much work to be done really should not depress us. It shouldn't shut us down emotionally or in terms of the work that we need to do. It should spur us on to say, thanks to things like the consortium, we can actually make progress if we lean on each other, if we listen to those who are actually experiencing the issues that we're talking about, and if we're willing to try things, and if they don't work, to change them and try them again, and if they don't work, to change them and try them again, all the while collecting information and letting people know what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the outcome is.
Yeah, that's the hard work, is sort of keeping up the energy to keep doing it over and over again. It's not a one and done kind of work at all.
My colleagues, my heroes who work in the world of diversity, get something called diversity fatigue, in which it's very, very hard to work on these issues over a long period of time and see some progress, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. We're lucky if it's that, and it's not 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards. And there are social, political, judicial issues that sometimes make it easier, sometimes make it harder. And so I want to take a moment to recognize and trumpet the experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, including especially a focus on gender equity as well as racial equity around the country at every kind of institution, and to say how important I think those people are, how important I think their positions are, how important I think it is to support them adequately and appropriately, and how important it is to listen to their wisdom, even as we're trying to listen to the wisdom of those experiencing the issues in the workplace, in a healthcare setting, in a place of learning, whatever it might be.
If you could accomplish one priority related to gender and racial equity, diversity, and inclusion within your society or field, what would it be, and what would you need to get it through and see it through?
You know, you were nice enough, Jamie, to send me these questions ahead so I could think them through a little bit. And this one gave me a headache because it really did. I can feel little twinges of it right now because there are so many priorities. And I went around and around and around and finally decided to share with you my concerns about faculty attrition. And this is in no way to belittle the concerns of non-faculty staff. It's in no way to minimize the importance of the learner's experience, but I'm very, very, very concerned about faculty attrition. And some measurements suggest that faculty attrition right now is at or near an all-time high. Now, there have been some faculty reductions, furloughs, whatever, during COVID, of course. But unfortunately, some of it is due, and maybe a significant part of it is due to the environments, to the climate that I talked about. Some of them are frankly toxic. And some of these workplace environments that are not optimal are a problem, I believe, contributing mightily to faculty attrition. And it's hard for big institutions to change. It is. Institutions of higher learning and the societies that represent them, they tend to stay pretty stable over very long periods of time. And we need to make changes in these environments by directly drilling down on gender inequities, racial inequities, and the pandemic has only added to the stress and to the tension that faculty are experiencing, and some of them are seeking reprieve by going somewhere else. Our so-called standpoint data, AAMC standpoint data, found that those who experienced harassment had greater intentions of leaving, and faculty who indicate they plan to leave soon, to jump ship soon, cite climate issues as a primary, if not the primary reason. So a priority is to lift this up to the conscious level of all leadership within our broad community and look it right in the eye and deal with it.
Can you imagine ways in which institutions of higher education and societies, across institutions might work together on that kind of issue?
I think what you're doing by pulling us together is a very important step forward. And the question will be, really, will we have some, some ability, no matter how glorious our titles are and how many degrees we have after our name, will we have the ability to admit that we need to make some changes in how we do things? And we can use the power that we have and the privilege that we enjoy to dismantle some of the policies. We can have conversations that require some courage about the privilege that's built into existing system that really tends to benefit some people and to really exclude others. We can work toward mutually agreeing on a clear vision of success. And we can work toward mutually agreeing on the standardization of policies and processes that can be operationalized and shared across our sector, in my case, organized medicine, so that what we're doing is taking a sort of a systems approach, not one person at a time, not one incident at a time, but the system. And then we have to be prepared for the inevitable pushback based on just inertia with no malintent, or pushback based on a desire not to change the status quo that benefits some and not others. And I wish I could say that there's none of that, but there certainly is. And we have recently promulgated, the AAMC has promulgated diversity, equity, and inclusion competencies in medical education. And as I know you're aware, Jamie, we've gotten quite a bit of pushback on that. And that's okay. That's okay. We need to listen. We need to be willing to be cognizant of other points of view and not be closed-minded, not put ourselves in a box that we only can hear our own voice. But we need to believe in our values, and we need to somehow push forward. Even if we change the details of how we do it, we have to recognize there's a problem. We have to recognize our own individual institutional roles in the problem and promulgating it and continuing it. And we have to have the courage to push ahead, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it takes, and make progress for the greater good.
I have to give so much credit to the leaders on the consortium and to all of the members who work every day on these really hard issues. And I think one of the benefits I hope everyone gets from it is the mutual support to be working in a community of people who are committed and institutions that are committed and really want to make a difference, even though it's hard. So with that, I thank you, and we really appreciate this wonderful interview.